2-1. There we go. First, for those of you on the call, thank you for being here. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. My name is Dave Welton, the Managing Director at Avier Wealth Advisors, a wealth advisory firm here in Bellevue, Washington. I'm joined by my friend, my colleague, a partner in the firm, Lars Phillips. Our firm, Avier, which has been around for about 20 years, our sole focus is on what we call the upper left tech community. What does that mean? That means Microsoft, Amazon. We've got an office down in Portland. You can imagine it's Intel, right? What we pride ourselves on is understanding the corporate benefits of each particular company better than anybody else does, right? And especially when you start thinking about deferred compensation, if you're not familiar with it, you're going to understand why it's so darn important to get a real strong grasp on this benefit, because this benefit is one that you can either choose to use it and defer $1,000 of taxes into the future, or if you really want to stretch the rubber band, you can defer $125,000 in taxes. The decision is yours, but it's critical to understand kind of those, the foundation of how it works. And today, that's what this webinar is. It's the introduction. The other one we do is kind of how to fix your deferred comp plan if you've been doing it and maybe you've made a few mistakes, because we've seen a few of those. So here we go. And just an announcement. Typically, anybody on this call that's ever seen me present, you'll usually see me with glasses on. I ran to the office to do this today, and I don't have my transition glasses on. So if you see me looking close to the screen, it's because the glasses I need are back at my home. I'm in Bellevue. So here we go. So the introduction agenda, really quickly. What we're going to do is, we're going to talk about what is it. I'll spend time here. We're going to talk in generalities. What is the deferred comp plan? Lars is then going to come back and talk about the benefit itself, the timeline that you have to be aware of, and then an overview on the payout structure. I'll then come back in and talk about, if you're really interested, talk to you about how you can maximize the benefit. So with that, what is deferred compensation, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's very similar to your 401k plan. Most people like the 401k plan because you're able to do that with pre-tax dollars, right? You get to lower your taxable income, right? So as an example, if you make 200 grand a year, you defer $24,000.
26,000.
Oh, 26,000. There you go, right off the top, Lars. Thank you. You're going to be my eyes today, Lars.
Absolutely.
You defer the $26,000. What have you done? You've essentially lowered your taxable income in that particular calendar year, and you've taken that 26 grand and you've moved it out into the future, right? It's in a 401k plan. It's deferred. It's growing tax deferred. And at some point when you retire, you'll either leave it in the 401k plan or you'll roll it into an IRA. And you'll then take money out, and at that point in time, you'll pay taxes on that money and the gain, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. I think everybody understands what that is. The deferred compensation plan is very similar, but there are some really distinct differences between the two. And we're going to outline those now. So decision to contribute, the 401k plan, it's continuous all year long. You're a little behind, you can expand and catch up, right? You're a little ahead, you can slow it down. You want to go from pre-tax to after-tax, you can do all sorts of different things. With the deferred comp plan, you've got May, right? There's a May election for the following year's bonus, the bonus that doesn't come for almost 16 months. It's September the following year, or the election period we're coming up on now is the November election, and that's for the following year's salary deferral, right? The difference between those, the deferral for your bonus is 100% deferral. The salary deferral is up to 75% of your salary. So when can you change this, the decision? Anytime. Again, May and November. Consumer protections, extraordinarily high in the 401k. That's your money. It's really difficult for anybody else to get their hands on those dollars. Deferred compensation, you have creditor status to Microsoft. What does that mean? You've deferred a bunch of money and Microsoft goes bankrupt. You got to get in line to get your money, right? With Microsoft, I feel pretty comfortable with this decision. Payout of funds, anytime. With deferred comp, we're going to talk about the payout. People think the big decision here is, oh, how much should I defer? Right? That is a big decision, but equally as big, equally as important is the understanding of how to set your payouts so that you don't have even maybe bigger problems down the road. So extraordinarily rigid. Contribution limit, 26 grand on the pre-tax. Anybody on this call, remember that's 401k pre-tax. I hope you're all utilizing the in-plan Roth conversion strategy, something we call the mega backdoor Roth. Most folks on this call, you can contribute right around $60,000 into the Microsoft 401k plan, but very limited amount on the pre-tax. Here we go, 75% of salary, 100% of bonus. The math is pretty simple, right? You make 200 grand, you can defer 150,000 of salary. Say your bonus is 100, that's $250,000 that you're able to defer. That's just round numbers. So that's how they're similar, that's how they're different. The benefit itself, I'm going to turn the controls back over to Lars, and then I'll join you here in a couple of minutes.
Beautiful, thank you, Dave. And I think that $250,000 number is the one that we have found is not unrealistic if you really do decide to stretch the rubber band and take full advantage of deferred comp. If we look at the benefit itself, how does this play out? Well, let's look at a year like 2021, and you're going to have stock grants that are coming in. And if you're a level 67 or above, those stock grants could be pretty big, particularly given what's happened to Microsoft's stock price over the last 2, 3, 4 years. Microsoft has certainly done very, very well. On top of that, you're going to have salary, and then on top of that, you're going to have a bonus. Now, the stock grants, we can't do anything about those from a tax perspective. When you receive those when you receive those stock grants, those are considered taxable income. You can't defer anything there. All of your deferrals must come out of salary and bonus, and that includes the 401k. That must come out of, again, salary. So if you were to defer $250,000, as Dave was just talking about, and let's just say that you didn't just do this for 2021, but you wanted to do this for 2022, 23, 24, and 25. The entire point of utilizing deferred compensation, much like the entire point of using a 401k, is the fact that you can take income out of high tax years. So while you're working at Microsoft, a lot of grants coming in, presumably you're in a pretty high tax bracket. You're moving income from a high tax bracket year out into the future when presumably you're in a much lower tax bracket year. And so in this example, if we were to defer $250,000, well, let's assume that half of that was at 35% and half of that was at the 37% marginal tax bracket. We're essentially looking at a reduction in our tax bill next year of about $90,000 if we say that it's $250,000 at a blended rate of about 36% that we are going to reduce our tax bill by. Now, that does not mean, though, that we just save $90,000 in taxes and we never have to pay those dollars ever again. We certainly do have to pay that tax bill in the future when we receive those dollars, but again, presumably we're going to be in a much lower tax bracket at that time. In this example, let's just say that the blended rate on these dollars in the future when we're presumably retired in 2026 would be 20%. So now instead of paying 36% on $250,000, we're paying 20% on $250,000. We're paying a $50,000 tax bill in the future. Now again, don't get me wrong, tax brackets could change. This looks at tax brackets as they stand at this very moment. They could change next year, they could change in the future, but using this analysis, we have to use today's numbers just for conversation's sake. In the scheme of things, though, I mean, this difference here, if we do this year in and year out and every single year, pushing more money from high tax brackets into lower tax brackets and out into the future, essentially there's a $40,000 difference between the tax bill that we're paying on those dollars. And not only that, we're able to delay that tax bill until a much later date. So a combination of reducing the tax bill and pushing it out is a spectacular, spectacular benefit. Now, another really important question about this, though, is that let's just say that you were to say, I really do want to stretch this as much as I can, and I do want to defer 75% of salary and 100% of bonus. Well, you've got a life to live these days, right? You've got a life to live today. You've got expenses tomorrow. You've got a mortgage. You've got college to pay for. You've got basic living expenses, right? And so how do we actually think about making life happen if we are deferring so much of our salary and so much of our bonus? Well, that's really where these restricted stock units that you have come in. When we look at Microsoft employees, they have those quarterly RSUs that vest. The typical schedule here is a February, May, August, and November vesting schedule. So we see that every single quarter, the end of the month, those shares vest. On top of that, we have deferred compensation enrollment time period that takes place, as Dave was just pointing out, in May. Compensation review typically takes place in August. There could be a few of you on the call today that just got bumped up to level 67 and are now eligible for this benefit. And then, as Dave was also talking about earlier, November 2020. So this is the only time period that you have. This is the only window that you have to make this decision for next year's salary. So as of December 1st, it is too late. You cannot defer any of next year's salary. It has to be done by the end of November. And so we really think about, and we'll talk a little bit more about this here in a moment, but we really think about using these RSUs that are vesting, selling those, using those essentially as cash, and then replenishing your bank account and replenishing other sources that you have in order to defer as much of your salary and bonus as possible. And then the last piece of the timeline here, and this is particularly important, is at the end of the year, if you do start to take advantage of deferred compensation, you also want to make sure that you're still maxing out your 401k. The 401k comes, I would say, above and before everything, because the 401k, not only does it act like deferred compensation, but you also get the match associated with it. And Dave, do you want to chime in a little bit here about some of the mistakes or pitfalls that you might see if somebody does not really look to adjust their 401k if they start taking advantage of deferred comp?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Think of it this way. If you make $200,000 and you're trying to get your $26,000 pre-tax contribution, the math is you do 13% of your salary, you get to the 26 grand, all is well. Let's say though that you went through an analysis of how you could maybe live next year and at the same time really stretch the deferred comp rubber band, and you said that I'm going to defer maximum. I'm going to go 75%. Well, now you only have taxable income of 50. If you keep it at 13%, last I checked, 13% of 50 is $6,500. Not only did you not take advantage of all the pre-tax dollars, but you didn't get all the matching as well. So it seems straightforward, but these are the little things that you've got to make sure when you put the puzzle together on deferred compensation, you want to do correctly. And there's other things you got to think about. There is, if you do 100% of bonus, you also do 75% of salary. Well, when bonus comes in September, you still owe FICA and Medicare taxes on that. You may think that you have a little bit of income coming in September, and suddenly you've got a negative paycheck. And we kind of chuckle about that, but that's real, right? This is where really in-depth planning comes into play.
Mm-hmm. So Dave, let's talk a little bit more about the payouts and what you have to think about, because as you were saying earlier, there's really two sides to this. There's how much do I defer? How much can I afford to defer? How do I make that happen? But then also on the other side, how do I set these payouts to take place? When we think about deferred compensation, payout is required to be set at the time of election. So what does this mean? When you put money into a 401k, you're putting these dollars into a nest egg, and then when you retire and you start distributing from the 401k, you can take whatever you want out of that nest egg. You're not limited. There's no rules around that. It's just a bucket that you can dip into. With deferred compensation, again, the payout structure is required to be set at the time of election. And so if you elect, I'm making things up, next year to defer 30% of salary, you have to say, I want these dollars to be paid back to me. They're going to be invested along the way, but I want these dollars to be paid back to me starting in 2030, and I want it to go for 10 years, right? These are important decisions, and we'll talk about why they're important here in just a moment. So let's look at a situation where somebody has made deferred compensation elections, but they chose, I would say, the wrong payout structure. They've said, okay, I want to push these dollars out, but I want to push these to retirement or to termination. Well, all of a sudden, don't get me wrong, they have pushed dollars from a high tax bracket into some lower tax brackets here. But in fact, they've managed to push some of these dollars into an even higher tax bracket. And then later in retirement, they have all these years where they're not even touching the lower tax brackets. In a perfect world, we want to spread these out as evenly as possible so that we are taking as much advantage of lower tax brackets over a correct time period. The other thing you have to think about is Social Security required minimum distributions, vesting Microsoft grants in retirement if you're a 55 and 15 employee. So if you've been with the company for 15 years, you're 55 years old or above. You have all of these other pieces coming into play. So in this example, in 2024, not only might they have all of this deferred compensation income, but they might have a grant that's vesting because they've been with Microsoft for over 15 years and they're at least 55 years old. So when we think about planning, not only do we have to take all this into account, but we also have to think about that if we want to move the payout, if we've said, you know, I've made a mistake, I've pushed too much too early, you can push these things back. However, you have to push them back at least 5 years. What does that mean? Let's look at a scenario. In this case, we have all these additional shares that are vesting because they're a 55 and 15 employee. We can push these dollars back at least 5 years, but again, you see, we have all of these years where we're not taking full advantage of these lower tax brackets, and yet we have these other years where we're dipping into higher tax brackets. In a perfect world, the planning that we do has us spreading these things out over time so as to maximize essentially or take advantage of these lower tax brackets to the best of our ability. And again, we're not even looking there at required minimum distributions that we might run into or Social Security that we might run into. We'll address questions here in a moment. We have a few other cool pieces to show you, but if you do have questions, please feel free. Use the sidebar, type them in. We'll try and get to them here at the end of the presentation. Feel free to type some in and we'll come right back to them. Dave, let me hand this back over to you here for a moment just to talk about really how to maximize your benefit and how we really think about all these pieces together.
Yeah, so yeah, let's talk through this. So we highly encourage you, because this is such a big decision. This isn't just, hey, I've just joined Microsoft, I'm going to open enrollment, I'm going to join the 401k plan, I'm going to use a target date allocation. It's pretty straightforward. I know the IRS rules. I know I'm under 50 or I'm 50 or above, so I know what the limits are. This is a much bigger decision. And so what we encourage you to do is find a firm, could be Avier, could be another firm, but a firm that really understands how deferred comp can change your financial life. And so what happens? If you call us, you reach out to us, say, look, let's have a conversation. We're going to work with you to help you develop a custom solution that's right for you and your family. One thing I would highly encourage you not to do is to say, well, my boss, who's level 68 or 69 does this, here's what he told me, or here's what she says that she does. You do not want to replicate that, because every situation in deferred comp is different. So if we end up working together, we're going to help you develop a custom solution. What does this look like? Let's get on the phone for 15 minutes. Let's make sure we're on the same page, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to explain our process. It's a two-step process. We want to have a meeting with you that's going to probably last 45 minutes or an hour, and we're going to want to gather information from you that is things like salary, estimate of bonus, what's an estimate of your monthly cash flow expenses for next year, what are one-offs going to be, like what would you think of one-off? Well, I want to buy a car. We've got one of our children getting married. We're going to put a roof on the house, so we need 12 grand a month every month like clockwork, but boy, we've got 3 big one-offs. We need to understand what those look like, right? And then we need to see a download of your RSU schedule, right? Really simple to get. And with this information, what we're going to be able to do is, oops, I think I went too far, Lars. Nope, I didn't.
You're good there.
We've built out a proprietary tool. This is a condensed version of it. But what we're going to do is we're going to say, gosh, these RSUs are coming in. We know what kind of cash flows we have. As Lars said, in February, May, August, November, we know what the cash flow needs are, right? We can then figure out, do RSUs cover all of these expenses? Maybe they do with excess, but the things that you what you want to be careful of is that when you start doing this planning, what you don't want to do is use 200, I can't read this, Lars, but I think it says 210.
A stock price of 210, which isn't too dissimilar from where Microsoft
Which is about where it is today, 215. I would not use that for planning for a client. I would not use $210 a share for Microsoft. Why? Because what if you've stretched the rubber band so far that you need the price to be at 210 in order to allow your family to do all the things that you've articulated to us? We would tell you to plan using a price of maybe 180, 175. The other piece here is, what is the withholding? The withholding on RSUs is, the default rate is 22%. If that's low and you get surprised with a big tax bill, nobody in this process is going to be happy. Make sure that through proper planning that withholding rate has been adjusted accordingly, right? Once you start plugging these numbers in, we can then see what kind of deferral, whether we did 50% deferral or 75% deferral. So you need cash flows. You need to use a realistic stock price. You need to make sure the tax withholding is appropriate. And at the end of this process of working with us, so we capture all this information on that first meeting. The second meeting, we're going to show you solutions, but we're also going to incorporate what you're doing right or maybe not right within the 401k plan. Are you taking advantage of the ESPP, the life insurance, the whole thing, right? So this allows you to do proper planning when it comes to deferred compensation. The other side of this is, let's see here. Oh, so let me just kind of go back. I got ahead of myself. So this process can allow us to do a couple of things. One, we're going to show you very definitively how you can reduce your particular tax bill. And I want to stress the word reduce, because this is not the elimination of taxes. This is the reduction in a current year, as Lars said earlier, to push out into a future year when you can better control the taxes, right? And I think everybody on this call probably had a bigger tax bill this past year than they've ever had in their lives, right? The process is going to allow you to understand what your cash flows needs are, because we're going to make you really think through this, right? We're going to review all the Microsoft benefits to make sure we're properly capitalizing on all of those. And then income planning and retirement, integrating, as Lars said earlier, the RSUs, RMDs, Social Security. What if this happens to be a second career for you at Microsoft? Maybe you retired from the military. Maybe you have a spouse that retired from Boeing, and there's a pension that's going to come in, right? Because then what you have to really look at is, how do I structure these payouts, right? I've got Social Security. I've got required minimum distributions. I maybe have another pension I've got to take into account. How did I layer all of these salary and bonus deferrals? This is an example that is not a 55 and 15 employee. If it was, we would show income here, maybe at this level, the next year down here, the next year down here, the next year down here. And then what we would do is we would layer in deferrals to match up so that all of the income is fairly consistent and fairly predictable over retirement. So
I would say, to chime in here, Dave, because these dollars that we see down here, these dollars are invested, much like your 401k is invested as well. And we're never going to nail it perfect, because obviously investments are going to fluctuate every day. The required minimum distribution is going to fluctuate based on the account value. But in the scheme of things, I think that you want to come up with a plan that gets you 95% of the way there.
Yeah.
You want to come up with a plan that takes into account all of these things and doesn't spike income into a higher year and takes advantage of those lower tax brackets over time.
And and as Lars said, you're never going to get this perfect. This is a puzzle that doesn't have real sharp, definitive edges to it, right?
And it's a moving puzzle, because tax brackets could change, right? But
tax brackets change, your investment allocations, etc. So at any rate, this is, I can't stress this enough though, if used properly, this is one of the greatest corporate benefits there is anywhere. And you say, well, what other companies maybe have this plan? Boeing's got it. Doesn't look anything like the Microsoft plan. Nowhere near. Puget Sound Energy's got it. Nowhere near. Costco has it. It doesn't look anything like this.
Mhm.
So those of you at Microsoft that have this, that are 67 and above, it's a wonderful plan. And in particular, if in fact there's a change of administration and there's also a change within the Senate, my guess is tax rates are going up for those folks that make 400,000 a year or more. Every 67 we've ever worked with makes way more than $400,000 a year. You're going to want to find ways to bring that income down to the greatest extent possible and push it down the road so that we can maybe get income, depending on your age, we might be able to level out the income at $100,000 a year, right? So that's part of the tool. So questions, Larson, I can't read the questions. Can you read questions that we've got?
Yeah, give me one moment here. I've got a couple of different monitors, so it might look like I'm not looking at the screen here, but I certainly am. So let me see. We do have a question that just came in here. It says, talk to me about the investment options available within the deferred comp plan. Dave, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I will say that the options are extraordinarily robust. We can have large cap US, mid cap, small cap, developed international, emerging market. We can have a number of different styles of fixed income, some diversifiers, things like REITs, etc. So you can create a very robust, globally diversified portfolio. I would say compared to the 401k plan, if you're not using brokerage link, which is the backdoor into Fidelity to get thousands of choices, if you're using the basic choices within the Microsoft 401k plan, the deferred comp plan is better. So pretty dang good. Hard to beat.
Right now, looks like we have one other question that came in here, Dave. And you can speak to this one as well. It says, tell me about my payout options. And I think what they're referencing here is like the deferral time periods, I think.
Yeah, good question. So when you, like Lars said, in November, if you decide to take advantage of the DCP, you have to pick what you want as a payout. You can either go at retirement. Please be careful, don't do that in all likelihood. Mm-hmm. You can pick a single year for that entire benefit. It's only wise if during the analysis you found a year that was really low and you needed to fill in a big gap, mm-hmm. or you go 3 to 15 years. Okay, so then you have a 3 to 15. You can go a 3-year payout, a 7-year payout, etc. The other issue that you have to be really careful about is you need to have an understanding of when you think you're going to retire, right? You have to have that understanding because you don't want to just arbitrarily guess on the payout structure, because if you make a mistake, you can move it, but you can only move it out, and it's got to be moved out a minimum of 5 years. So you can go from a 10-year payout in 1 year to a 4-year payout, but that 4-year payout's got to start 5 years later. So there's always a solution. It's just creating understanding the short-term problem, what the long-term solution is, putting those together, and then you can typically find a good fix.
It looks like that was the last question that we had, Dave, so that's perfect. Excuse me. We'll tell you what, Dave referenced this as well earlier, but this is just one of the many benefits available to Microsoft employees. So things like ESPP, stock grant management, the mega backdoor Roth 401k available to Microsoft employees. There are so many other benefits available to Microsoft employees that we put together a Microsoft benefit resource page. It's simply avieradvisors.com/Microsoft. Please feel free. Check out the website. If you want to schedule some time with Dave and I, please reach out, let us know. We have LinkedIn profiles. We post a lot of information about Microsoft and Microsoft benefits there as well. So thank you very much to everybody who did attend today's webinar. Dave, any final words?
I would also just say thank you. Please, doesn't matter from my perspective, if you work with Avier, you've got an advisory firm that you already work with that you trust, dig into this plan, right? Dig in, understand it, know it. The window opens in just a few days. Yep. And you may think, oh, I've got a long time, I can put this off. I'm telling you, it's a very thoughtful decision. It's one that takes time to think through, because once you set it, you can't undo it, right? I mean, you can undo it if you do it on November 17th and then you have a change of heart before November 30th, you can go and unwind it. But on, when the clock strikes 12 on December 1st, you own it, right? So be thoughtful, use it. Being a certified financial planner and a guy who really loves watching people, create wealth so that they can live this wonderful life into the future, stretch it, right? Stretch it. What we find typically is the first year people tiptoe into it, right? And that's okay. Tiptoe, but if you can find a way to stretch it a little bit, stretch it. Take advantage of it.
Yep. Beautiful. Thank you for attending. We appreciate it, and we are available to talk anytime that you'd like.
Thanks, Lars.
Thanks, Dave.